Long before the dawn of recorded history, on the vast and mysterious continent of Africa, wild animals roamed, even as they do today. As they do now in Africa, the vultures gathered long ago at dawn for a savage, grisly feast. And out of the darkness rushed a strange creature spurred by hunger to drive the vultures away. So, by stealing meat far in the prehistoric past, this creature may have won survival for himself and for his descendants, who will call themselves man. Today, after hundreds of thousands of years have passed, a scientist seeks to prove that man was born in Africa. In search of man's earliest ancestors, Dr. Louis Leakey has spent his lifetime roaming a wild and desolate land. The scale of his quest defies the imagination. It is as if on a great beach he was searching for a single grain of sand. But for 40 arduous years, Dr. Leakey has persisted in his search. He staked the work of a lifetime on the evidence of a single clue. Leakey was convinced that more than 500,000 years ago, man's earliest ancestor had gripped this small gray rock in his semi-human hand. Mankind, in the 20th century AD, is surrounded by evidence of his own genius. Living in vast cities, served by a sprawling technology, he has conquered the earth and challenged the infinity of space. And yet, paradoxically, in the fullness of his power, the richness of his knowledge, man does not know how he came to be master of the earth. He has no final answer to the most simple, basic question: where did I come from? Seeking man's story in the relics of ancient times, his most recent history is clearly written. For more than 1,000 years, he flourished in Rome and the city-states of ancient Greece. In the valley of the Nile, the Egyptians left a hieroglyphic history reaching back 5,000 years. But as they become more ancient, the traces of man are fewer and more cryptic, and his recorded history finally dwindles until there is only the work of a nameless human artist who worked on the walls of a cave 28,000 years ago. Before this, there is no recorded history of man. Somehow, somewhere, he must have lived and developed to become what we are today. But this story is buried in the infinite receding shadows of time. In the wild and lonely plains of East Africa, one man has spent 40 years seeking to solve the mystery of man's origin. Committed to a lonely quest in a savage land, Dr. Louis Leakey has thrived on a diet of dust and heat and hardship. An admiring native chief has called him the black man with the white face, for, as few white men ever have, Leakey belongs in Africa. Louis Leakey was born in 1903 in a mud-walled hut, a lonely mission deep in the highlands of Kenya. His father, a dedicated minister, struggles to bring Christianity to heathen Kikuyu tribesmen. Leakey's mother, a hardy and determined woman, raises 4 children. Far from her native England, she seeks to give them a solid Victorian upbringing. But for young Louis Leakey, the wilderness is a playground, and Kikuyu boys are playmates. For the rest of his life, he will speak, think, and even dream in the Kikuyu tongue. Growing up, Leakey combines a taste for the outdoors and adventure with the burning curiosity of a born scientist. Enthralled, he reads of strange discoveries made in France and Germany beginning in the 1800s. At first by accident, later by design, archaeologists are unearthing incredibly ancient evidence of man. In several places, fossil bones are found dating back more than 50,000 years. As reconstructed, these bones reveal a bizarre creature with huge jutting brow ridges and a receding chin. He is called Neanderthal man. Despite his fearsome, brutal features, scientists conclude that this squat, shaggy caveman is a human predecessor. He lived and fought for survival long before the dawn of recorded history. The next great discoveries are made in the Far East, first in Java, later in China near Peking. Here, scientists reconstruct bones of a creature with distinctly human features who lived 500,000 years ago. They call him Pithecanthropus, literally the ape man. So the conviction is born that Asia is the cradle of man, the only place worth looking for still more ancient human remains. But Louis Leakey, as an archaeology student at Cambridge University in the 20s, startles his professors with a scientific heresy. He says, "I am convinced that Africa, not Asia, is the cradle of mankind." Leakey returns to Africa after his graduation. In Kenya's capital city, Nairobi, he organizes his first expeditions in search of early man. Few scientists believe he can possibly succeed. He is considered a maverick at best, at worst, a total fool. These films, taken by Leakey himself, record the hardships of his early expeditions. Travel is slow and difficult. The most routine trip is in part an exploration. But this is in Leakey's favor. Though he is looking for something very difficult to find, he is at least looking in places which no one has thoroughly searched before. Leakey's first excavations, digs as they are called, are financed on a shoestring and carried through only by back-breaking effort under the blazing sun. In the parched African rubble, Leakey discovers definite traces of early man, stone tools and other artifacts. His critics remain unconvinced, but Leakey is now completely determined. At first alone, later with his wife and closest colleague, Mary, he will search on in Africa.
And so we set to work to try and find a place where the conditions would be right for the search we were going to make. It was a long and arduous task, made more difficult by the roads and the general conditions of that time. That we had to have a place where, at the relevant time, somewhere round about 1 million years ago or more, there had been water, because without water, man didn't live, and the animals on which he fed would not be present. Secondly, we needed a place where that water was rich in minerals, because without that, any bones that were left behind would not have been preserved and fossilized for us to dig up years later. Thirdly, we needed a place where nature subsequently had cut through the rocks to expose for us the chapters of the Earth's history in which these relics were buried. Eventually, we found a place that fitted all these conditions, a place called Olduvai Gorge.
Olduvai Gorge has been called the Grand Canyon of evolution. for it is quite literally a deep slice into prehistoric time. Far in the dim past, natural forces laid down layer upon layer of rock and sediment, of volcanic ash and gravel, building slowly to the present land surface. Then, in more recent times, a raging river cut this spectacular gorge, exposing a geological record plunging 2 million years into the past. To the layman, the rocks of Olduvai are silent. But to men like Louis Leakey, they tell an amazing story with exciting eloquence.
Olduvai Gorge gives us one of the most remarkable stories of the past, the last chapter of the Earth's history, starting from the present day, right away back 2 million years. Here we're standing at the very top of the series, and up here where the grass is growing and the plants are growing represents written history, the time of the last 4,000 or 5,000 years, the time of the pyramids, the time of man developing to the present day. And here beneath it, in this 2 feet of this hard rock, we have the whole of the time that is recognized of man in America. The last 15,000 years are here. These grey beds here, beneath the hard, blocky 15,000, are old beds formed in a lake. They're full of fish bones and hippo remains and crocodiles. And man was living here in this, what we call bed 4, making his tools and developing slowly towards what eventually became you and me.
Now Leakey starts down the gorge, beginning a walk backwards into time. An average of 6,000 years is traversed with each foot he descends. With each step, the Earth's majestic history rolls back. Times of earthquake, drought, and flood, the lifespan of billions of animals, the endless orbits of the moon, the eternal fire of sun and stars. Lower, older, lower, older still. Leakey now has descended about 70 feet and roughly 500,000 years.
And this is a site that Mary and I found and excavated way back in the past. It's the earliest known site of true hand-axe man. It corresponds in time, roughly, to when Java man and Pekin man were living, and until a few years ago, that was the oldest known man in the world. They lived, these men of ours, by the side of this stream that laid down these gravels, as you see here. And by this little stream, they made their tools, and they hunted, and they lived. We know that because we find his hand axes here, tools that he made 500,000 years ago. Until a short time ago, man of this period was the earliest known man in the world, and all the rest before it was mystery.
Leakey now descends into the crucial hunting ground. The rock beneath his feet is more than 500,000 years old. To Leakey, who has struggled for 40 years to grasp the message of the past, this place abounds with ghosts and phantoms. Walking here, he often will pause and fall silent, as if straining to hear in the far distance the lingering spirits of early man.
And now I'm down at the bottom of the gorge. My feet are resting on the black lava which formed the old land surface on which these lake beds formed. And here behind me are the earliest part of the Olduvai series, deposits that were formed just nearly 2 million years ago. It was here that in 1931 we first found examples of simple tools like this, just a water-worn pebble with a jagged cutting edge. Stone tools that go back to a very, very remote past in time, nearly 3 times as old as anything previously found. Who were the men who made these tools? Where did they live, and how did they live? And that was the problem that Mary and I went out to look for. We wanted the answer. Who were these men?
Nairobi, the capital of Kenya. Today, a showplace of modern Africa. And yet, within living memory, lions have been seen on these main streets. And Dr. Leakey is fond of recalling how he used to go hunting in an area now the scene of traffic jams. The curator of the Nairobi Museum for many years, Dr. Leakey has only recently been able to earn his living from field research. Though feeling imprisoned in an office, he has not wasted time. He has worked as a handwriting expert and a detective. He is known as an authority on dogs, birds, tropical fish, and African culture. In spare moments, he has written 3 books dealing with African social problems, and several more on his foremost enthusiasm, the search for prehistoric man. But whenever money and time have permitted it over the years, Dr. Leakey has packed up for the trip to Olduvai Gorge, leaving the comforts of civilization behind him. His wife, Mary, shares his enthusiasm, energy, and dedication. A noted archaeologist in her own right, she is not at all reluctant to leave home at a moment's notice, departing for a period of weeks or months in the African wilds. Even today, Africa is a rugged land. Less than 100 years have passed since the colorful days of Stanley and Livingstone. No one should venture casually onto the road to Olduvai, lying southwest of Nairobi across 327 miles of jungled hills and barren plains. In their time, the Leakeys have been blocked by sudden floods and blinded in shrieking dust storms. All this they have learned to take in stride. One of the routine driving hazards in this part of Africa, a straggling herd of cattle blocks the road. They belong to nomadic African tribesmen, the Maasai.
Mzee, jambo. Habari, siku nyingi. Jambo sana. Nasemaje sasa? Jambo.
The Maasai are a proud people, quite unimpressed by the trappings of modern civilization. Far from craving acceptance in the white man's world, they are highly selective in allowing the white man to enter their own. Over the years, however, Dr. Leakey has won their friendship and their respect.
Mimi nitakuja hivi karibu. Nini manyato yako iko wapi sasa?
Iko pale.
Pale chini huko.
Pale. Huyu dereva ndiye.
Basi kama hizo dereva anajua, mimi nitakuja.
Alafu wakati ya nyuma unakuja kukunywa hapa na kurudi. Pale njia.
Traveling on, the Leakeys are approaching Olduvai. More and more often they encounter big game, giraffe, wildebeest, and even the occasional rhino. All his life, Leakey has lived amid these great animals, a spectacle which never loses its impact, never fails to inspire both excitement and wonder. The cheetah is the fastest animal on land, capable of running at 60 miles an hour. The ostrich, another African record holder, the largest bird. On African lakes, pelicans fish in unison, while below, the hippopotamus lurks in all his massive dignity. For the average tourist, the abundance of African game often appears merely a novelty, an enormous open-air zoo. But scientists like Dr. Leakey see much more. This, for them, is a kind of living laboratory, a case study in animal behavior and evolution.
These long-legged giraffe, their long necks and ungainly walk, are the only survivors of a whole group of animals that lived here at Olduvai in the dim past. We have, for example, in those days, a massive built giraffe with a short neck and short legs, about twice as big as the giraffe today in his body, who had on his head great antlers, rather like those of a moose. But the giraffe that we see today, who is all around us, was also present, and he survived. He survived because of his long neck, which enabled him to feed off the tops of the higher trees and so get a food supply when other vegetation was scarce and other animals were dying out of starvation. Lions are spoken of usually as the king of beasts. In the ordinary course of events, lions are curious but not at all dangerous. In our camp here at Olduvai, back in 1931, the very first night that we camped, a big Maine lion walked right through one of the tents between two of my young students who were sleeping and didn't touch either of them. We've had that sort of thing happen again and again at Olduvai. Lions come into camp, sniff at us and move out. Lions are not really the enemies of man.
Man, perhaps, is safe, but to the animals who graze on the African plains, the prowling lion is a real and present danger. This is Africa's unending cycle: the pursuit, the kill, the gathering of scavengers.
These creatures, the vultures and hyenas between them, spend their lives tearing up dead animals all over the plains, not only today, but in the past. We know that when primitive man was here at Olduvai, there were many vultures present. There's every reason to believe that in their habits then, they were the same as now. It's this, above all else, that makes it so difficult to find the remains of early fossil man, for at that remote time, he hadn't yet learnt to bury his dead. Consequently, when someone died, the body lay around for the scavengers to eat. So we have to be very lucky to find any human remains at all.
The search for early man, indeed a precarious gamble. Assuming the carrion feeders of Africa failed to demolish the remains of our earliest ancestors, the chances of finding them hundreds of thousands of years later have been estimated to be 1 in 1 million. It is early morning, but the Leakeys' camp at Olduvai is already stirring. There is work to be done and vital messages to be passed to the outside world by shortwave radio.
Nairobi Control, 202 going Nairobi Control. Do you read me? Over.
Yes, over.
Johnny, when you come down, Mummy says bring 2 sheets, 4 pillowcases, 2 towels. Do you understand that clearly? Over.
Mundane they may be, but the problems of housekeeping here are acute. Washing water is scarce, and the nearest supply of safe drinking water is 35 miles away. Cut off from civilization, the Leakeys have been forced to drink from the same mud hole where rhinoceros took their daily bath. Once, when food was short, they were reduced to a diet of rice, flavored with marmalade. Sometimes this scientific outpost more closely resembles a zoo. There's often a monkey in the tent poles, and a canine rabble never fails to appear when Mary is serving breakfast. A baby wildebeest, orphaned by lions, is rescued from certain death by the Leakeys and raised with loving care. Generally, the inmates of the Olduvai menagerie live together peacefully, but between monkey and dog, there always exists a playful state of war. Each morning at Olduvai, the Leakeys collect their faithful band of followers and begin the working day.
In. Go on, in you get. Go on, Tonya.
The Leakeys' dogs are useful beyond mere companionship. In the field, they will detect the prowling leopard or lurking cobra and warn of danger. Without them, Dr. Leakey feels, he and Mary might have been killed long ago.
Come on, Simon.
A professional team, the Leakeys must often split up. Dr. Leakey will deal with affairs in camp. Mary, as the digging specialist, goes off to search the gorge on her own. Mary Leakey lives in a world most women cannot even imagine. Bumping along primitive roads, surrounded by clamoring dogs, spending her days in solitary labor under the sun. A quiet woman, she says with characteristic brevity and reserve, "I like my life very much indeed." An excavation at Olduvai, where the process of digging a hole in the ground is raised to a fine and delicate art. To ensure against damaging vital specimens, the most critical digging is done not with picks and shovels, but with dental picks and toothbrushes, probing down just inches at a time. Everything taken from the excavation must be carefully examined. Conceivably, an entire skeleton of early man might be unearthed in tiny bits and pieces that the layman would dismiss as worthless rubble. The Leakeys' African aides are highly skilled and deeply dedicated. Many have acquired through experience a knowledge of archaeology that would impress a PhD. During long days on her hands and knees, Mary Leakey inspects her harvest of rock and fossil bone. Days and weeks may pass without a single exciting find, but she has cultivated a stoic patience. Each fossil specimen is carefully labeled and charted, for back in the laboratory, a seemingly insignificant find could become vitally important. Not a fragment is lost or overlooked. Most common finds at Olduvai are fossil bones of animals. Collected over the years, these give a picture of the more than 150 different species of wildlife which roamed in Africa nearly 2 million years ago. Yet, for decades, not one intact human bone of this period is found. But still, Leakey is tantalized by oddly chipped pieces of stone, frequently unearthed in very ancient layers of the gorge. It looks like nothing at all, but to Leakey, this is an awesome relic, a tool that was made, used, and abandoned hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of years ago.
We don't know just exactly when primitive man first started to make sharp, cutting-edge tools, simple tools, but we are pretty sure that before he ever made them, he used natural, sharp cutting edges which he found. And then one day, quite accidentally, he happened to hit two stones together, and one broke, and the flake that came off had a sharp edge. And that gave him the idea that he could make sharp cutting edges whenever he wanted them, and not have to go looking for them and find them when nature had done so. He could make them.
Leakey has made many stone tools, seeking to learn what telltale marks would distinguish the random activity of nature from the purposeful work of man. On the right, a specimen unearthed at Olduvai, one of hundreds Leakey has found. And he asks, is it mere coincidence that without trying to, I have made almost the same thing today with my human hands? The diggers return from the gorge, ending another tedious, exhausting day. All living things seem to breathe a sigh of relief as the sun sets over Olduvai, bringing the cool darkness of evening. camp, the Leakey's aides will now relax. In their open hut, by the light of lanterns, the Leakeys work on. They will use these hours to sort, classify, and discuss the finds from their latest dig. Finding a specimen is only the beginning. A still greater task lies in figuring out what it is and what it may mean.
Look what I've got here. I've got an absolutely magnificent
The presence of man is only suspected. None of his bones have been found. Even so, the Leakeys feel that they could prove the existence of prehistoric man at Olduvai. For decades, they have sifted tiny clues with a thoroughness worthy of Sherlock Holmes.
Everything that we're sorting here tonight comes from a single level at a single site in Olduvai, a site called BK. It's a site where man was making very crude, simple choppers, such as these, with a jagged cutting edge for skinning and for chopping animals. But in addition to that, he was using very considerable numbers of small and more refined tools. For example, here, you've got the equivalent of a modern steel gouge or woodworking tool. Then there are woodworking chisels, or as we call them, burins. They have a business end, which is roughly a quarter of an inch across and made by the intersection of two flakes, a thick-set edge, which is ideal for chopping and cutting across the grain, as distinct from working with the grain. You see quite clearly what I'm doing to the tray there with that working edge. Then, too, we have funny little discs, little discoidal scrapers, for scraping skins of animals and turning them to something more useful. You see, these people were eating a very large variety of animals. And one of the things that we find in all our digs is the remains of the food which they ate. And it is because we can interpret these random bones that it becomes possible to get some idea of how these men lived and what they did. There is, of course, no trace of fire at all. These people were living entirely off raw foods. But let me try and show you how it's possible to interpret some of these quite fragmentary things, which at first sight look so insignificant. This tray here looks very meaningless, but actually everything there tells those of us who can understand it a story. For example, first of all, let's take this little bone here. It doesn't look like very much, but we know for certain that that is the bone of something like a frog or a toad. I can't identify it for certain. It will have to go to a colleague of mine in Paris who tells exactly what kind of frog or toad that represents. Or again, here's the smallest specimen in today's takings. A tiny little curved object, looks like nothing at all, but if you look at it closely, you'll find it's the incisor tooth of a rat-like animal. A rat-like animal who lived something like 500,000 years ago and was eaten by the people who made these tools I've just been showing you.
But the evidence of animal bones and stone tools can be disputed when the remains of man himself are absent. So it was for 30 years at Olduvai. In the face of skepticism and even ridicule, the Leakeys worked on, alone and virtually ignored. Morning after morning, year after year, Olduvai's ancient secrets are still preserved. The Leakeys begin again, searching ground already searched before, following hunches which lead to nothing. And then the fateful day comes at last. A summer's day in 1959 that Leakey will remember all the rest of his life.
In 1959, and on the 19th of July, I think it was, or the 17th of July. I was ill. I had a flu. I stayed in camp in our truck, and Mary went out alone. She spent the morning crawling up and down the cliffs of FLK-1 to see whether there was any further clue to be got. Round about 11, she was ready to pack up and come back. She did one more crawl up the cliff. She saw a small fragment of, first of all, what looked like a human skull. She bent down with her brush and brushed, and as soon as she brushed on the scree, there were actually 2 human teeth. She abandoned everything, rushed back, and told me, I've got it, I found the man.
Recalls Leakey, we almost cried out of sheer joy. These pictures were made less than 24 hours after Mary caught the first glimpse of her great discovery. And now, you are witness, as Dr. Louis Leakey lifts from the soil of Africa the fragments of fossil bone that will give a remarkable new perspective on the origin of man. July 1959. The Leakeys' camp at Olduvai rings with the joy of discovery. Dr. and Mary Leakey gloat like proud parents over their newfound fossils. In 19 days of painstaking excavation, they have gathered nearly 400 tiny pieces of bone at the place where Mary made her original find. Even before these are closely studied or assembled, one fact is clear to them. These are by far the oldest human remains ever found. From details of bone and tooth structure, the Leakeys can also tell that their prize was a male, about 18 years old at the time of his death. The Leakeys are eager to show their extraordinary evidence to other scientists. One of the first to see it is Professor Philip Tobias, a friend and colleague.
Well, it was a very exciting day, of course, in July 1959 when Mary Leakey found the skull they'd been looking for 30 years at Olduvai. I don't know if you could imagine the emotional state one would get into, having looked for something for 30 years, knowing it must be there, having found its tools, having found the food bones of the animals that it had eaten, and yet not having found the chap himself. They came down, and I very well remember that morning when Louis and Mary unveiled this glory box of bits of fossil that they had carried on their laps all the way from Nairobi to Johannesburg. Piece by piece they brought them forth, and Professor Dart, one or two others, and myself were there, being privileged as the first people to see this important specimen. There was tremendous excitement. Professor Dart, I can well remember, dewy-eyed and tear-dimmed at the emotion of the moment, looking up at Dr. Leakey and saying, "Louis, I'm so glad this has happened to you, of all people."
The news is out. Leakey's discovery startles many scientists and rouses spirited debate all over the world. The excitement of the Leakey's discovery reaches far, to San Francisco and the University of California at Berkeley. Here, a physicist and a geologist working together have perfected the potassium-argon dating process, a method for determining the age of rocks. Rocks found with Leakey's fossil bones are sent from Olduvai for analysis. Tests are run, an extraordinary process which translates chemical measurements into an index of antiquity. The result? Fantastic, all but unbelievable. Leakey's discovery is nearly 3 times older than any human traces previously found, dating back 1 3/4 million years. In Washington, D.C., at the Smithsonian Institution, another specialized project is underway. Assembled at long last, the Leakey's fossil fragments reveal a skull of strange form and dimensions. Leakey has called his find Zinjanthropus, or East Africa man. Now, with the concrete evidence of the skull, a master sculptor will recreate the face that once covered it, a face long lost in the distant past. So the face of Zinjanthropus is seen again on this earth, nearly 2 million years after his death at Olduvai Gorge. At Olduvai, scientists from around the world now come to visit Dr. Leakey and pay him honor. With financial aid from the National Geographic Society, the hillside where Zinjanthropus lay is excavated on a massive scale. More can be done in months than in all the years when the Leakeys worked with little outside help. It is a truism of science that discovery only leads to further mystery and new points of controversy. Some of Leakey's colleagues doubt that Zinjanthropus should be called a man. Although admitting that he has man-like features, they feel he is far too primitive a creature to have made the tools found near him. Privately, Leakey too begins to wonder. Digging goes on, seeking Olduvai's deeper secrets. And in 1960, an astonishing find is made. Another set of teeth, but very different from those of Zinjanthropus. These are much more like the teeth of modern man. Leakey realizes that he has found a second type of man-like creature whom he christens Homo habilis. Only a few parts of the skeleton are found, but this discovery has extraordinary implications. If not one, but two man-like creatures lived here at Olduvai, Leakey must try to figure out what became of them and how they relate to modern man. So a story emerges from this lonely valley, a story reconstructed after the passage of nearly 2 million years. Nearly 2 million years ago, we know that the climate at Olduvai was misty, warm, and humid. Clearly, where the gorge now lies, there was once a lake, and near its shores lived Leakey's first discovery, Zinjanthropus. Zinjanthropus was probably not the Olduvai tool maker, although he was much like man in many ways. By all evidence, he was not highly intelligent and probably quite timid, for surrounding him were many animals more powerful and aggressive. Giant pigs as large as the present-day rhinoceros. The Dinotherium, monstrous cousin of the elephant. The lion, looking much as he does today. Over a great length of time, the climate changes at Olduvai. A long period of drought begins. As today in Africa, this is a severe test of all living creatures, a frantic battle for survival. One of the casualties is probably Zinjanthropus. His food supply dwindles. Easy prey for ravenous animals, he finally meets extinction. So passes a fascinating creature, in whom nature nearly, but not quite, created man. But Leakey's second discovery, Homo habilis, is also here. And probably he wins survival by competing with scavengers for precious shreds of meat. Homo habilis probably made Olduvai's tools, but he remains a mysterious figure with only fragments of his skeleton yet discovered. Later, much later, still a third creature appears at Olduvai, Homo erectus. His remains and stone tools have been found in many other parts of the world. Massive, powerful, he was a hunter, killing for meat. Homo erectus would seem a direct ancestor of modern man. In time, he developed sophisticated tools and weapons. In northern climates, he even discovered fire. But Leakey suspects that he too was a dead end, doomed eventually to extinction. It is Homo habilis, Leakey believes, who survived by the development of his brain, the sharpness of his cunning, to spawn all the generations of man. Leakey's evidence, the incomplete but precious fragments of Homo habilis unearthed at Olduvai. He feels these indicate that a creature existed long before Homo erectus, who was already developing toward modern man. So Leakey will seek further knowledge of this mysterious figure working on in his native Africa, now generally acknowledged as the cradle of man.
Sometimes, when we look at the work of the last 40 years, we begin to wonder what we've really achieved, because there are so many gaps missing in this story. We've got a great many new finds made over the years at Olduvai and elsewhere. But nevertheless, the real emphasis has to be laid on the fact of our ignorance. There's so much to do, so many things to find, and every time a new find is made, it poses new problems, but it answers earlier ones. It poses new questions, and it raises new objections by from some of our colleagues. People often ask Mary and me why it is we go on and on with this search. But of course the answer is that it is highly satisfying. It's knowledge for knowledge's sake. We are discovering things. There are many days, often many weeks, where there's nothing. But always we know that just round the corner may be one of those great discoveries that make life worth having.
Drawn by the prospect of fresh discoveries, the Leakeys search on. Says Dr. Leakey, you may call our motive curiosity if you like, but it is a major curiosity. I want to know, who am I? What was it that made me what I am?